This is the second night, but there were a couple of very interesting calls last night about this very subject. One woman called and said, why couldn't you equip airplanes with a way that in the cockpit they could release something that would put everybody in the passenger's compartment to sleep? If you had a camera looking into the passenger's compartment and you saw trouble start, why couldn't you release something that would knock everybody out? Somebody else called and said, vis-a-vis putting armed sky marshals on the flights, he was a retired cop. And he said, you know, we've had the training. We know about weapons. We know how to handle crisis situations. What about recruiting retired law enforcement people who have, you know, not that much to do now to do this until they can train a younger crop of so the American spirit and ingenuity is alive and well. Let's go to Garrick Utley. We're halfway through this broadcast tonight. It's 1 o'clock in the East. Garrick Utley has the latest news headlines for us now. Garrick?
Thanks, Jack. We're going to go downtown and look again at Lower Manhattan. Gary Tuckman was just reporting there a short while ago about the only good news, and this is very slim good news, as you can see, in Lower Manhattan, is that it is a beautiful night once again. We've only had one sort of chilly, bad, wet, stormy night here. It was a couple nights ago. Otherwise, it's been good conditions, and that's important, not only for the physical safety of the rescue workers there, but also for their emotional condition. They don't have to fight the elements. Anyway, as Gary Tuckman reported, it's been 120 hours now since the last survivor was found. Hopes are fading. The death toll, the official confirmed dead, is 190, but still more than 4,900, nearly 5,000 are missing. And after last week's devastating attacks, New York and Washington are at last ready to get back to work. That's the New York Stock Exchange down there on Wall Street. George Washington getting a hose down because of all the dust, the flags flying at the Stock Exchange there. Streets are being cleaned. The opening bell is less than 9 hours away now, and trading will get underway. We'll see what happens in the markets, what the Americans think of the economic future of their land. Turning to President Bush. Now, there's a view of Wall Street. You can see the more of the dust there. It was really a mess. I was down there today. President Bush returned to the White House on Sunday, and he is telling Americans that it's time to get back to work. The president, as we know, was meeting with his officials up at Camp David, and when he returned, he wanted to say some things to the American people. Here's some of what he had to say.
This war on terrorism is going to take a while, and the American people must be patient. I'm going to be patient, but I can assure the American people I am determined. I'm not going to be distracted. I will keep my focus to make sure that not only are these brought to justice, but anybody who's been associated will be brought to justice.
This weekend, many Americans celebrated their patriotism. Look at this. This is Tucson, Arizona. 25,000 people gathered to show their true colors. A very human statement. The effort that went into that, just imagine that. In Brooklyn, on Sunday, Brooklyn, New York, the message was the same but more somber as thousands attended a vigil in Brooklyn Heights, just across the river from the World Trade Center disaster. Finally, a peaceful look at the Empire State Building along Fifth Avenue this evening, Midtown, Manhattan. Tonight, it's showing its true colors, red, white, and blue. The lights had been turned off much of last week. Well, the man who is believed to be the leader in the terrorist attack, Osama bin Laden, number one on everybody's most wanted list in the world today, he's saying that once again that he did not do it. Don't hold him responsible. He's not guilty. He, of course, is the man that has been fingered by just about everybody in the world. And now he's released a statement really underlining that he had nothing to do with it. So let's go through the statement. There's some interesting aspects to this. He said, after the recent attacks which the U.S. has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accuse me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it, that is the United States. And it goes on. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seems to have been planned by people for personal reasons. And as for me, I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations. Well, Jack, we can all weigh that on the scale of credibility and come to our own conclusions. Let me just add one little thought here. A very important news development, which we're going to be following for the next few days, is in that part of the world. Pakistan today, Monday, is sending a message to the Afghan leaders saying, hand over bin Laden within 3 days or face the consequences. We'll see what comes out from that, what the Afghan response is going to be. But it's important because we're all waiting to see what what and where and when and how the next shoe will drop in this tragedy. By having this 3-day deadline, at least, it seems that we'll have through Wednesday before any missiles or guns are going to be fired or any moves like that. So we'll all be keeping our eyes on the response from Afghanistan to that Pakistani message. Jack?
Indeed. All right. Thanks a lot. Gary Cutley, the latest news. Randy in Minnesota, we're going to get to you in 2 seconds. I want to ask Mansour Ijaz to put his Council of Foreign Relations hat on here for a minute and talk with the knowledge about the Middle East. President Bush said, in effect, you're either with us or you're against us in this thing. And that goes to a lot of non-Middle Eastern countries as well. But the other part of the statement was, if you harbor, grant refuge, comfort to terrorism or to terrorists, you are no different than the terrorists themselves. Is he going to have to modify or back off that in some way? I mean, if you apply a strict definition of what he said, you're talking about Saudi Arabia, you're talking about Egypt, you're talking about Syria, you're talking about a lot of countries that it could get very tricky applying the strict definition of what he said to. How's he going to handle that?
I think that definitions here are not probably the most important way to look at this. Essentially, what the president has to do is create a consensus amongst the Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC.
Okay.
If he can persuade Saudi Arabia to lead the ball for him within the OIC, and the OIC includes countries like Sudan and Syria and even Iraq.
Right.
Now, they may abstain, they may not want, then at least we know who the real guilty parties are.
Right, that'll be a clue, right?
Exactly.
Sure.
Now, if he gets that part done, that represents a core nucleus, which he can then take to Russia,
I was going to say,
China.
if he can do that, he can go to the rest of the world and say, look who I've got on board this thing.
Exactly.
What are you waiting for?
Now,
right?
the moment that happens, quite frankly, I think that even the Taliban doesn't have much of a chance at that moment.
Yeah.
And in a sense, I think part of what has happened here today as the Pakistanis go to Afghanistan is to say to them, look, whatever happened here, whoever's responsible, this was too much. You guys overstepped your bounds.
Yeah.
You know, in a sense, what they did was destroy their own movement. And that is what bin Laden is worried about. That
Right.
essentially, he may even have not given the order on this one.
That old
And maybe he
cliche.
was a subcontractor.
Yeah.
But essentially, he knows that the game is over now.
Careful what you wish for, you might
Exactly.
get it. All right.
Exactly.
Randy, I'm sorry to keep you waiting in Minnesota. How's everything in the Northland?
Pretty good.
What can we
I
do
have a
for you?
two-part question
Go ahead.
for you. What could we have possibly done for these people to hate us so bad? And secondly, what is their eventual goal? What would make them happy? What do they want out of all of this?
Mansour probably has the answer to both of your questions. We touched on part of it in the first hour of the program, but let's go back and quickly do it again.
I think what we have done to them is essentially rail on their sensitivity of what they conceive their religion to be. We lived, until last Tuesday, we lived 2 oceans apart from everybody, a benign neighbor to the north and a benign neighbor to the south. We essentially had no natural enemies, whereas just about every other country in the world doesn't have that sort of situation with them. Now, bin Laden's biggest complaint has always been that America, with its beer-drinking ways and military assets, came and essentially soiled what he considered to be the Holy Land.
We were the infidels.
We were the infidels. And he didn't understand that the real infidels were sitting right amongst him all the time. They don't admit that part. That's the problem with these people.
Sure.
They don't admit what's wrong with them. They only want to admit what's wrong with us. Now, so I think that is what we have done in their perception for them to hate us as much as they do. Now, can we do anything to rectify that? Well, my judgment is that the way you do that is you go to these countries and you say, all right, if there is that kind of a structural problem, what we are prepared to do is, if you guys are prepared to come clean with us on what is wrong, we're prepared to help build you up into something more than what we did before. One thing I disagreed with Larry on before, and that is that you cannot say that the United States gave trillions of dollars in aid and nothing ever came of it. We gave trillions of dollars worth of aid and never gave a prescription of how it should be used.
Right. It was just throw money at the
That
problem.
is why we got into
Throw
the
money
problems
at the
that we did.
problem, like we do with drugs, like we do with a whole lot of other things, without
Exactly.
ever understanding what's structurally wrong with the thing to begin with. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, by the way, in case you're getting tired and it's Sunday night and you want to go to bed, I'm here to tell you should not, because on CNNI, which is one of the sister networks, I'm told we will have a live interview with a Pakistani foreign minister at sometime around 1:30 Eastern Time, perhaps talking about the results of that mission to deliver some sort of ultimatum to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Patricia Chadwick, you've been without a stock exchange for a week. This is an unprecedented situation in our country, but during that time, have your clients had access to you, the people, customers of your firm, and if so, what have they been saying to you? What are you saying to them? What kinds of conversations can we eavesdrop on with you here?
I think for the most part, the customers have wanted to feel sure that their portfolios were okay, their securities were safe, the transactions that had taken place were done, and that, you know, the firm was okay. Now, in certain cases, as we know, firms have been eliminated practically.
But before we just leave that there, most of those have backup systems
Absolutely.
to preserve all the records, the portfolios.
Right.
I mean, the investments are safe even though the businesses may be gone.
Disaster recovery, and even though they're doing it with fewer people, you know, in essence, customers wanted to be assured that business would go on for the most part, except for those places where it was impossible to get to work. People went to work even though the market wasn't open.
All right, once you told them, look, there's nothing wrong, your portfolio's safe, don't worry, your investments are there, you know, then what? What's the next thing on their mind?
Well, I think for the most part, you know, what do we feel the implications of all that's happened will be? Mostly, I think, concerned that there'll be liquidity in the marketplace when it opens up.
Has the Fed done enough, by the way, in your opinion, to support and shore up these markets, or should they have cut rates maybe before the stock market opened tomorrow?
I think the expectation is that they will cut them significantly, as much as maybe 50 basis points tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
I think it could be a disappointment in the marketplace if they didn't.
If they don't.
They have sworn that they will provide all the liquidity, and in fact, as long as they provide all the liquidity they need, rates will be coming down. And I think there's every sense that they will do that.
The beauty is that we have a Federal Reserve chairman who's been through this over and over and over.
Just not here in this way in this
Yes,
country.
right.
What about that, Larry? What's your thought about the Fed? You write that column for Investors Business Daily. Has Greenspan done enough? We got to remember that he was busy raising rates that some say contributed to this economic slowdown we're in the middle of. So a lot of these rate cuts early in the cycle were simply taking back rate increases that served to slow the economy. And some economists and analysts that I've talked to over on CNN-FM, the business network, have been critical of the Fed, saying that they remain behind the curve, at least going into this event that happened Tuesday.
Well, that's right. A lot of people have made those kinds of criticisms. But I think the real question is what impact does the Federal Reserve have really on the economy? And I think there is an impact, but not a significant impact. The real impact has to do with tax, spend, and regulation policies. And quite frankly, we have doubled the burden of the American taxpayer since 1950, which is one of the reasons why we have a lot more secondary wage earners working outside the home. If the government really wants to do something to stimulate the economy, get the government off the backs of hardworking men and women. We have to work right now until almost the first week of July in order just to pay all of the taxes that we have to pay, federal, state, and local.
Well, didn't we just get this
up.
huge tax cut? Didn't all our taxes just go down? I guess not.
Pardon me?
I said, didn't we just get this huge tax cut?
If you call $300, $600 a huge, then
No, I was being
definition that I have. I know you
I
were.
was being facetious.
I know you were. Look, since 1900, about 10% of the American taxpayers was taken, state, local, and federal. Right now, it's almost 50% if you count unfunded mandates. So let's get the American government off the backs of hardworking men and women. Let us do our own retirement, our own health care, our own medical needs, fund money for protecting people and property, and let the country do what it's supposed to do and let people do what they're supposed to
Do you think Bush should listen to a capital gains tax cut here right now?
I hope he would. Any kind of tax cut right now, as far as I'm concerned, that puts money back into the pockets of the American people is a good thing. We ought not be running surpluses. Surpluses mean the American people are being overtaxed.
Yeah, it's a drag on the economy, a surplus. I mean, it's in the economic way of looking at things, you're right. Capital gains tax cut. Bush had said when the subject came up in Washington a week or 10 days ago, maybe at some point down the road he'd look at it, but he wasn't ready yet. Does this event change the possibility that the street may get something like that, which would be helpful?
Well, I think the interesting thing is that the Congress has changed a bit.
Yeah.
You know, they've spent all their time bickering about, I mean, they were poles apart on issues that they were really not meant to be at all apart on.
Right.
So it was surplus versus deficit and just the innuendo of all that. This has coalesced them. I mean, if you remember back when Bush Sr., Bush father, was trying to get a declaration of war against Iraq,
Right.
I remember being in Paris at the time and just sitting